Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the webinar, The Secret Formula to Youth Ministry. My name is Luke Wallen. I'll be introducing our speakers, Peter Andrews and Matt Summerfield today. Just a couple of points of logistics. You can see on the right, and in terms of the panel, the ability to ask questions and also to respond to polls as well. We'll be asking questions throughout the webinar, so please feel free to post those, post your questions at any given point. There'll also be polls as well, so just keep an eye out for those. In terms of our speakers today, so we have Matt Summerfield, speaker, church leader, president of Urban Saints, myself, helping churches to better navigate change and reap the benefits of technology, and Peter Andrews from Energize. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to our guest speaker, Matt Summerfield.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Luke. And thank you, folks, for joining us today. Let me just give you a little bit of a flavour of what we're going to be doing as we think about this whole subject of youth work and the secret formula to youth ministry. Three things, really. First of all, we want to explore a little bit about the challenges of being a young person today and what we're facing as youth leaders as we work with them. Secondly, what is this secret formula that hopefully you're intrigued about and wondering about? And then finally, want to explore how actually Energize and Church Desk will be very helpful tools for all of us as we seek to work with this brilliant group of young people who we're connected with locally. But I want to start here with this picture of a roller coaster, which reminds me of those amazing words from the legend that is Ronan Keating when he sang many years ago that life is a roller coaster, you just have to ride it. If only I could hear back, maybe a couple of you are singing it as I speak. But whatever you think about the song, it's certainly true by sentiment. Life is a roller coaster for many of our young people today who are facing huge challenges in the journey of childhood to adulthood. Yes, there are those moments of exhilaration as they kind of enjoy moments of life. And on a one level, young people in the Western world have never had it so good. And yet we all know that many young people are having moments of struggle, moments of worry, moments of anxiety, and they just kind of want to get off. As we say here, youth is a volatile mixture of experiences and choices. And so whilst we have these huge array of consumer choices, actually those in and of themselves can be quite paralyzing the way they affect their lives, starting with their own lives and how they feel about their identity. We're all aware of the gender challenges today. What about my purpose? What do I believe about faith in a very strongly secular culture? And of course, the massive prevalence of emotional and mental health problems. Those are the things within themselves, but then externally, the pressures around family life, future careers, relationships, friends. We know these things are enormous things for our young people. And again, whilst I've worked with young people as a volunteer for about 30 years now, I would say there's never been a time where young people are hitting 16, 18, even in their early 20s, and so uncertain and sometimes so paralyzed about some of these big decisions about family, careers, relationships, friends, probably again rooted into the battles they're facing with on their inner self. Here are some stats just to paint a picture of this. There are many more that I'm sure you've come into contact with. But here's a big one for us to grapple with as those of us who listen as church leaders and maybe youth leaders. 94% of children and young people in the UK primarily only know Jesus as a swear word because they are unreached by regular, consistent Christian relational youth and children's work. That is our mission field. And even those who are reached, and I guess this is a really disturbing figure, 40 to 59% of young people who come to some kind of faith in their childhood and youth years may well drift away from that by the time they hit their 20s. 50% or more of all churches have no provision for youth and children at all. And so there's a massive challenge when we think that there are 48,000 plus churches in the UK and more than 24,000 of those churches have nothing that engages with children and young people in their community. Or what about this? Thinking of some of the issues that young people are facing, 15% of young people would reflect that they've experienced some kind of bullying, cyberbullying, online bullying in the last 3 months, and over 55% of young people would say that they've had any form of bullying, not just online bullying. Those are shocking statistics. This one is the one that kind of gets me, that the largest group of consumers of internet pornography are 12 to 17-year-olds. And again, we're told through various statistics that between 10 and 12 years old is where a high proportion of young people are going to have their first exposure to online pornography, which leads to this next challenge, which is around sexting, with 46% of young people saying sexting is a part of everyday life, and 44% of girls and 32% of boys in England engaged in sexting on some kind of regular basis. Now, again, if you want to know the source of all of those statistics, we can supply that subsequent to this webinar, but they're all rooted in surveys that have been conducted over recent years. And of course, probably none of those things shock you, but this is the world in which we're operating in today. And so there are lots of things that we're struggling with. Let me just outline 5 things which I'm sure will resonate strongly with you. I don't think I've ever met a single church or youth group who are struggling with the challenge of time and the challenge of finding volunteers. We struggle with it in my own church, and I know that that many churches I talk to are the same. I think for some churches, there's a challenge around vision, about what they really want to see happen in their youth provision and what they're dreaming of for their young people. What's the big vision that we might have? Or thirdly, even understanding and impacting the world of young people. Do we really understand what's going on in their lives? And when we do, how can we positively impact them? No, I don't think this is about becoming gurus in youth culture at all, but there is something about feeling intimidated almost by this very different world that young people are living in, and can we really make a difference? And of course, we have vast numbers, as I've mentioned, of young people who are disconnecting from faith, who are rejecting Jesus out of ignorance rather than rebellion. They just simply don't know. And they're way further back in the faith story. They've got no Christian narrative that they understand. How do we engage them? Like, how will they ever cross the door of a church? And then finally, I would say, I think I'm observing, and I know peers in other organizations would say the same, a real confidence in the good news. Do we really believe that Jesus Christ is the good news, and that he can make a difference and bring transformation to people's lives? That he's not just selling tickets to heaven, but actually that he's good news right now, right here, for the whole of our lives. Now, I wonder, when you look at that list of 5 things, which of these really stand out to you? There's an opportunity now to conduct a little poll with you. And so I'd invite you to choose 2 of these that you would say are the most challenging for you at the moment. And so this is a bit of an over to you moment to kind of select those that you feel are the most challenging, and we'll give the results of that in just a moment. So nearly everyone's voted, 50% through, just a few more. Okay, so I can see that no big surprises here, folks, that lack of time and volunteers is soaring ahead at the number 1. We've had nearly everyone vote here. And so reaching unreached young people, a very close second. And then understanding and impacting the world of young people as a close third. Confidence in the good news coming in at 4th, and limited vision coming in last. But those real standout ones, at the moment, a third of people basically saying that there is a lack of time and volunteers, and over half of you responding the challenge of actually reaching unreached young people. And so let's move on with that in mind, and I guess it's time to explore a little bit of a vision idea before we get into the formula. And I want just to remind you of this brilliant passage of scripture here, which is Psalm 78. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. Psalm 78, which talks about, in these verses 4, 6, and 7, the psalmist says, "We will teach We will tell the next generation about the glorious deeds of the Lord, about his power and his mighty wonders, so the next generation might know them, even the children not yet born, and they in turn will teach their own children, so that each generation would set its hope anew on God, not forgetting his glorious miracles and obeying his commands. And I think this is such a great verse for us to hold as our vision for working with young people. Look at that verse 7 that says that every generation will set its hope on him, not forgetting his glorious miracles and obeying him. Surely that's what we're all aspiring to that vision, that the young people we work with will set their hope on him and know all the good things he's done for them and choose to follow him and live their life for Christ. But those earlier verses remind us that as we work with this generation, the impact of our time, even this week with young people, isn't just upon this generation, but it's on the generations that follow. I want to encourage you this afternoon, in those moments of despair when you just feel like giving up, that when you work with a 13, 14-year-old, you're not just being good news to them, but the psalmist says you're being good news to their children who aren't even born yet. You are positively impacting the way that they think, even in moments when you don't believe that. And so I hope that that's an encouragement today. So let's kind of dive into this crazy idea of the secret formula. And here it is, folks. This is the big reveal. I should have had a drum roll, really. This is the secret formula to youth ministry, 5E to the power of R. And there's a massive irony, I've got to be honest about that, because I was absolutely rubbish at maths. I did do a maths A-level. In fact, remarkably, I was the only person, this is probably a terrible confession, in the whole of my maths A-level group who passed, but I only passed with an E in my A-level, which to this day I choose to believe stands for excellent, but I apparently educationally it doesn't. But I scraped through, so I'm not a man of great formulas, but here is the formula for great youth ministry, 5E to the power of R. And in a sense, we could finish there. We could say we're done with that. We promised you a formula, and then we've given you one. And of course, you're wanting more, and I don't blame you. And let me just say, as we dive into these letters and what they stand for, of course, folks, there is no secret formula. You know that. Really, this formula, or perhaps a better way of putting it, is a framework I've discovered is a very helpful way for us to think about the things that we do with young people, things that will bring life, things that will bring growth, things that will help them in their journey of faith and life. And so see this as a framework, see it as a lens, see it as a way of reviewing what you're currently doing and what you can do going forward. So we have 5 E's and then we have an R. And so let's start with the first E, which is all about enjoy. Now, I have 2 sons, Andy and Dan, and they are now 24 and 21. But when they were small children, going to church on a Sunday morning, and they'd go off to their children's groups, whether it was AMPT or Kids Club or the Banana Club. I'm sure all of our Sunday morning stuff have a whole variety of creative names. And afterwards, we'd all travel back in the car as a family. And if I spoke to them and asked them the question that I would ask them pretty much every Sunday and said, how was it today? Generally, if they hadn't had a good time, they would always use the same words. They would say, it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun. And so kind of here's our first challenge, really, that if it's not fun, that they simply won't come. Like, fun is the entry level requirement, it seems, the kind of basic 101 stuff that we have a responsibility to create an environment where young people are having a good time. And of course, we can be super creative in this. I think we live in a culture that, our young people, particularly as they head to their latter teenage years, or even with levels of alcohol consumption pretty low in the young teenage years, are told the only way to have fun is to get drunk and to party. And actually, we serve a God who is full of joy, and there's a party in heaven when someone comes to faith. And so if we believe that the kingdom of heaven is a party, and we believe that we serve a God who's incredibly creative, then we can have incredibly creative moments of fun with our young people, where actually we blow the cobwebs of Christianity, and they think, wow, I didn't realize I could have this amount of fun with Christians in some kind of church context. Because I guess what I would hope for is that the high point of the week for our young people and our children is when they hang out with us, and that they get to do things that they could never, ever do, that we are literally creating memorable moments that they will remember for the rest of their lives. Now, some of those things can be really super simple. So, for example, like my youth group, Like if we're running out of games ideas, then they would play the game Sardines every single week. If you're not familiar with Sardines, you basically need some dark spaces. It works best like obviously in the night, in the winter. And we use the whole of our church building, so every room is available to them. Someone goes to hide, we all count to 30, and then you have to go and find them. And if you find them, you have to hide with them, and it's basically the last person to find them. And it's just a crazy fun game, and our kids enjoy it, and they just love the freedom of having the roam of our building to do it. Now, that's simple. It doesn't cost any money, but there are other things that we can do that sometimes do cost a bit of money, but again, truly memorable. Let me give you a couple of other ideas that we've done, and I'm sure you've got loads yourself. So for example, we have gone to the local DIY store, purchased a large 3 to 5 meter piece of plastic plumbing guttering for the outside of a house, got loads of ice cream, sprinkly dinkly, sauces and cream, and basically rested that stuff on some large tables, and then said to our young people that you now have to create the biggest ice cream sundae ever, and then you have to eat it. And it's just a crazy thing. Like, where do they get to do that? And the reality is they get to do that in church. We've done this thing called 15 hours of fun, which is 15 hours of fun for the young people, but pretty much 15 hours of hell for the leaders. We get them rocking up on a Friday evening about 6:30, go on a little bit of a magical mystery tour, hire a coach maybe, go swimming, privately hire a pool. We've done that in the past, go bowling, watch a movie, whatever, come back, have late night feast. We did this at Christmas once with a Christmas meal. Other times we've done pizza. And then basically throughout the night have various activities are going on, from films to kind of dancing, to making videos, to games, to exercise and aerobics at 6 in the morning, bacon sandwiches, all of that kind of stuff. Those who want to sleep can sleep, but most don't, and we all go home exhausted. But it's a memory that young people never forget. And so those are some things that you could do. I'm sure you've got other ideas, but the point about this is, how do we create memorable creative moments that young people will never forget? The second E is about education and the importance of educating our young people, because fun is a great place to kind of start, but it's a terrible end. And actually, we're running all the things that we run because we want to see young people thrive. We want to see them grow in life and faith. And so we want to create an environment of learning where they are learning about faith and life, and that we're talking about learning for the whole of life. That we recognize that the good news of Jesus is good news to your emotions, to your physical body, to your finances, to your education, to your relationships, to your choices, to your spiritual life, to everything. And so everything is important to explore as part of some kind of curriculum and development with our young people. Which, of course, brings us to the subject of the Bible. One of the things that makes us different from the secular youth group down the road is that we're people of the book. We actually believe that God's word is important, and it's powerful, and it's so much more than an instruction manual. We ought to ditch that Bible, basic instructions before leaving earth, and actually recognize that ultimately the Bible is God's living story. It's a great definition of what the Bible is. Everyone lives by a story, and we want young people to understand that the real story that tells us what is going on in the world, what has happened, how has it all gone wrong, how can it be put right, where is our place in this story, are we loved? Those big story questions are ultimately only answered in this ancient text. And so we want to help young people engage in this story, and in really creative ways. There are loads of resources out there, and Energize, which Pete will speak about later, is a great resource tool to help you creatively bring the Bible alive to young people and help them understand the story, so that when we talk about maybe a subject like forgiveness or getting on with our parents, we're not just referring to the Bible as just some moral code that has some practical teaching on those things, but actually that forgiveness makes sense in the context of a big story of a God who is restoring our relationship with him and invites us to restore our relationships with others. And so as we do this, we're not just thinking about them kind of gathering knowledge. This is about transformation, not about information, and that we're equipping them for the whole journey of childhood to adulthood, which does mean that I think education includes helping young people know how to do some of the basic skills in life, which could be cooking, which could be changing a tire, which could be managing a budget, which is developing resilient skills. All of those things are important to God because God is interested in every part of our life. And so think about some of those practical life skills. I just mentioned changing a tire. I wonder if you could, in your program, have one evening where you just get a whole bunch of people to rock up with their cars and teach your young people to change a tire, and then maybe explore, what are the life lessons that we can learn from changing a tire? Why do you need to do it? What's that about? Without it being kind of cheesy and twee, but using some of those practical life skill tools to actually still teach some spiritual truths. So enjoyment is super important. We need to create environments of memorable moments, but also environments of great learning for life and faith. Thirdly is all about encounter. And this is about creating space for young people to connect with God. I'm sure you've all had the experiences of seeing so many young people come to faith in residentials, particularly summer camps, whether it's an Urban Saints camp, a Scripture Union camp, or Soul Survivor, or any of the big festivals. And I want to suggest that one of the reasons that so many young people come to faith at camp at the end of an academic year is because no one ever asked them in the whole year leading up to it if they want to become a follower of Jesus. Now, that might not be true of your group. You may be good at regularly and repeatedly creating opportunities for young people to say yes to Jesus for the first time. But I really want to encourage you to do that. We believe, particularly as we come towards Christmas, we remember that one of the names of Jesus is Emmanuel, which means God with us. And we either believe that or we don't. And so whether we gather on a Sunday or Friday or Wednesday or whatever, when we're gathered with young people, we believe that God is present. It's like wherever you are now, I could say that Radio 2 is currently playing in that place. But of course, you've got to tune in. And if you tune in with the right equipment, then you're going to hear Radio 2. And we have to teach both ourselves and our young people to recognize that God is present and we can tune into him and engage with him. We want them to notice the ways that God is active in their life all the time, that God is speaking to them, God is trying to get their attention. It's not so much that we're bringing young people to God, it's that God is already involved in their lives, and how can we help them notice the way in which he is present? And of course, sometimes this can involve actual creating encounter experiences, creative contemplative experiences. The best book I've ever read on youth ministry is Mark Iaconelli's book, Contemplative Youth Ministry. It should be recommended reading. Read it. It's the best book ever. It's so good. And he has helped us in our youth group create some opportunities for young people to engage with God, and particularly non-Christian young people. Let me just give you one example before I move on. So we've done a meditation exercise once where we actually had about 40 to 50 young people all lying on the floor with some very gentle reflective music playing. And we invited them just for 2 minutes to chew over in their minds the phrase, "Be still and know that I'm God." It's a famous psalm, as I'm sure you know. Now, of course, initially there's laughing, giggling, and worse going on. But eventually they settled. And again, the majority of these kids are non-church kids who aren't usually brilliantly behaved. But after a while, we had nearly 2 minutes of silence as they reflected and slowed down and did something that in their busy lives they rarely do, which is try to be at peace. And so at the end of that experience, we gathered them in groups, and we were amazed, absolutely amazed, the number of those young people who spoke positively about those experiences and really had an incredible sense of peace. Now, that's just one thing that you can do. But again, that book, Contemplative Youth Ministry by Mark Iaconelli, is a brilliant book that provides some good teaching, but also a whole bunch of exercises that all of us can engage with our young people and with our leaders to kind of grow in encounter. This is not about being charismatic or Pentecostal. This is about discovering different ways that we help young people realize that God is present. And so we've talked about enjoyment, education, and encounter. The fourth E that we want to explore is about empowering. And the essence of this is that faith is caught, not taught. Ultimately, you grow as we go. And so how can we create opportunities for young people to serve as early as possible? How can we move to a mindset where ultimately in our thinking is we're not running stuff for young people, but we're running stuff with young people? We have a young person in our group who has dyspraxia, and he finds some of the physical games very difficult. And this happened just literally last Friday when we were playing a game of dodgeball, and he got hit in the head and he got quite distressed. And I'd spoken to his mum, and I spoke to him later on, and basically I said to him, look, whenever we do these kind of games, if you don't want to participate, why don't you come to me and you can help me run the game? Now, the guy's like 12 years old, and he was like, his eyes lit up. It was like, wow, this is great. And so rather than him kind of leaving the room at that point and not being engaged, like, how can I get him in and actually start to develop some leadership stuff? Over a number of years, we've tried to use intentional leadership development stuff to get our young people involved in leading and in serving, and not just in our youth program, but actually in the wider life of the church. You know, I say when I do this seminar in other places, you know, as a pastor of a church, I actually don't believe that 8-year-olds are sufficiently equipped to do marriage counselling. I think they're too young and don't have the vast experience. Of course, that is a joke, by the way. But I think they can do anything else. So I think 8-year-olds can serve in the host team. I think 8-year-olds can have some engagement in worship. I think 8-year-olds can pray for people. I think 8-year-olds can serve in the 4-year-old ministry. The only thing we should never get 8-year-olds to do is take up the offering as some kind of tokenistic naff gesture to engage them. My own faith story is I grew up in a Christian home, been a Christian pretty much all my life, but my faith revolution happened when someone asked me to actually get stuck in. At the age of 17, I was invited to become a youth leader in this program. And to be honest, I just felt a bit of ego, really. Didn't pray about it much. I just said yes. But within 4 weeks of that, God absolutely broke my heart for young people who were only a few years younger than me. And I realized that if I was going to teach the Bible, I was going to have to read it. And I realized I was going to have to take responsibility for preparing outside, and both in terms of prayer and creative ideas that would engage these guys. I realized my need of God, and my faith revolution absolutely happened in that moment, because I moved from a spectating faith to a participating faith. If we really want to see our young people own their faith and own their engagement in your group and church, then we need to give them responsibility. We need to empower them. And that demands time, it demands intentionality, and a bigger commitment that we make, which pushes us into this final E, which is all about our example. Because ultimately, your life example matters. Young people really are watching you. Now, of course, they're watching you in the context of your youth group. We heed the what Jesus said in John 13:34-35, and he talks about, by our love for one another, all men will know that we're his disciples. And so it kind of really matters the way you and I operate in our youth teams and how we behave and how we speak of each other as a youth team in front of the young people, because we're modeling something about the difference that Jesus makes in our lives. But actually, outside of the youth program, I think it's really important that we're creating spaces where young people can see our example. Let me just give you one example of that. Some years back, I had a particular group of young people who were every 2 weeks were coming around my house, and they were having a meal with us as a family. And then I'd spend half an hour or so with them talking and praying about life. And then they would eventually kind of go home. And this is quite a while ago. And so what happened in this context was we were all going for a meal and having a meal. And my youngest son, Dan, he brought some food to the table on a plate, and he dropped it. The plate smashed and food went everywhere. And in that moment, suddenly I was aware of all of these eyes on me. All of these young people looking at me to see how was I going to respond in this moment. Was I going to give Dan a slap? Was I going to shout at him? Was I going to be really holy and go, the Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away, blessed be the name of the Lord? What was I going to do? And I realized it was a profound moment for me that if my relationship with Jesus did not affect how I responded to my son in front of these young people, it was worth nothing at all. But of course, they had to see me in the home in order to be able to do that with all the right parent consent forms and safeguarding policies. And so if we're serious about impacting the lives of young people, then our example is really, really important. And part of that example is not about demonstrating that we've got our lives together, but a real, authentic, vulnerable, honest faith that we have, that we recognize that sometimes we're going to be saying and showing our young people that sometimes life is really hard, but God is good, and that we're holding on to him. I wonder when the last time your young person, people saw you weep, when they saw you doubt, when they saw you struggle. Because if they see us that real, I'm not talking about faking it, but that real, and yet in the midst of that holding on to God and declaring God is good in the midst of tough times, then that will help them in their own tough times and show to them that actually following Jesus is not about being perfect and having your life together. It can be different. And so finally, that draws us to the final R, which is all about ultimately relationship. The importance of relationship. The gospel is all about relationship, doing life together, not just running a youth group. I guess if Psalm 78 is my favorite Old Testament verse about youth ministry, then 1 Thessalonians 2 verse 8 is my favorite New Testament verse, because in that the Apostle Paul writes to the church in Thessalonica, we loved you so much, he writes, that we didn't just give you the gospel, but we gave you our lives. And I think this is what this is about. We're not just running a youth group, we're doing life together. We're building genuine friendship. We ultimately want to be the family of God. That's what we're inviting young people into. God is our Father. Jesus is our elder brother. The Holy Spirit is our constant companion and helper and advocate and comforter. We are brothers and sisters in Christ, and we are inviting young people to be part of that family, to be in relationship with us and the God who we serve. And so I want to encourage you to think about, what does that mean to do life together, to be the family of God? So there you have it. 5E to the power of R. The importance of enjoying and creating fun experiences, memorable moments, creating learning environments through a commitment to education, presenting the Bible as God's big story, learning life skills, spiritual lessons for life and faith from childhood to adulthood, creating space regularly for young people to encounter God, to say yes to him for the first time, empowering them into leadership responsibility and serving, and having them see your example through committing to relationship with them. This would seem a good moment to jump into another quick pause of a poll. And so I'd love you to look at that list of things and tell me which two would you prioritize at the moment. Maybe there are some here that you feel like you're doing really, really well on. But as a takeout from today, if you were to choose two of these that you really wanted to push harder in and grow in and develop in, then which would those two be? And so I'd invite you to do a poll, and we will continue with with our webinar, but we'll give you the results of that poll a little bit later on. So I'm going to move on whilst the poll's going on. Is that all right, Luke? So I'm going to do that. That's cool. And so I mentioned right at the start that I am a church leader, as well as a volunteer youth leader, as well as having the privilege of being this ambassador, this president role for Urban Saints. And I'm always looking for things that are going to help me be more efficient in organizing my ministry, both as a pastor of a church, but as a youth leader, so that ultimately I can spend more time with young people. Things that are going to help me to do this 5 to the E to the R thing. And so, as you know, today we've got Church Desk, and we're looking at Energize as well from Urban Saints to share how we can perhaps practically outwork some of these areas of ministry. And so I want to introduce Luke again, who is from Church Desks. And again, as Luke speaks and shares a little bit about Church Desk and how Church Desk can help us with some of these things that we've talked about, if you have any questions that you want to put to him, then feel free to kind of make a note of those. But Luke, tell us how Church Desk got started.
Well, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Matt. And it's an interesting question. I think when we think about why Church Desk got started, it was in part because we recognised that there are a number of trends that were taking place,
not just within technology, but also in the church, that we need to be very attentive to. Firstly, I think it's widely known in a church context that technology doesn't always go hand in hand with the church. But equally, we know that more and more people are going online. I say that because I know that even our grandmothers are going online as well. We're seeing that actually there's an overwhelming number of plus 65s and plus 50-year-olds that are spending time online, and they're looking up to see what their grandkids are up to, and they're looking to make purchases online. They're looking to do internet banking increasingly as well. We also became aware that communication itself has changed quite significantly. Yes, people are sending tweets, people are using Facebook, but the type of communication has changed as well, and it's a little bit more bite-sized than it used to be. Another element was that I think one of the things that we really had to come to grips with at Church Desk is that the resource is incredibly tight in the church, and how you manage those resources really determines your success. And we see some churches that are brilliant at it and some churches that aren't so great. And so that's part of the reason why we wanted to build a product or build something that can really help churches, namely Church Desk, helping with their administration and their outreach as well.
So when it comes to Church Desk, how does this tool, this resource, help people build effective relationships in the context of youth ministry?
So there's a few ways it can help. And I appreciate that every youth ministry is different. A rural youth ministry, of which you might have a congregation of maybe 10, 20 children, is very, very different to an urban context. We do take that into account, but just as an example of some of the ways that we might help, namely, if we can think about how we can share resources and better between different youth groups in the church, between youth pastors or people that are leading different youth groups, then that means that we're having a greater level of collaboration. People are working more closely together. We know what each other's doing. We know about the best practices that might be there too. One of the things that come up time and time again is that typically a lot of rotas, they're done on paper in the church context, and it doesn't make sense when so many people of the age group from 25 through to 40, which are typically spending a lot of their time online, are using paper to manage their rotas. They expect a rota to be online, or at least have a sense of their availability. And often that complexity can hold some people back from the age of 25 to 40 from actually engaging with the church. Another view into this is that a lot of churches, they don't have a database, they don't have a means to reach out to young people in their communities. And by young people, it doesn't necessarily mean 14-year-olds, it means 18 to 25-year-olds, but they're not segmented. And they're not used to receiving pew sheets or letters which constitute maybe 3 or 4 pages. They're looking to understand what might be going on in their church that they'll personally be interested in. Another element we took into account is around security and making sure we have a system that's secure as well. But that's a few ways that, obviously we can go into a bit more detail, and I'm sure there are other questions on the line as well. But ultimately, it's thinking around how can we save time from the administrative activities that typically take up a youth pastor's time, or even a vicar, a clergyman, someone who is running a church. It can be incredibly administrative intensive. The role of anyone in the church should be to focus on their mission and be reaching out to as many people as possible, young people included, especially because they're the future of the church. And that's what we hope to do with Church Desk.
Luke, that sounds really great. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're developing in the coming months to support youth ministry?
Yeah, we can. And unless there are any other questions, unless there are any questions that are coming in from the floor. Any questions?
No, it doesn't seem to be at the moment. So
no, that's fine. I'm happy to answer that question, Matt.
You're obviously doing a great job.
Hopefully they're still listening. Now, in terms of what we're doing in the coming months, so we're recognizing that more churches are beginning to work together. In the Church of England, whether it's a mission area or a mission and ministry unit, or potentially deaneries becoming a much more formal structure. We're also seeing that in church groups as well. And so our vision is to ultimately help those churches work better together, to share resources more effectively, understand, how can we replicate a success in one church to another church. And we're trying to build that into the system so that becomes more feasible. It's quite difficult with the current technology that's available to churches today.
Can I just ask you just about the whole attendance thing? I run a youth ministry, and we've got various groups running. how does Church Desk help with that kind of thing and tracking all that stuff?
So that's a feature that we're currently building for the system. So it's not one that it's actually going live next year. That's a good question.
Great.
One of the things that we find is that when it comes to tracking attendance, there's a balance between, yes, we need to track attendance, but we also need to be aware of how spiritually engaged our communities are. And so that's something that we take into account when building various elements of the system.
Now, there's so much we could look at with Church Desk, because I know there are lots of things that it does, but how do people follow up? How might they find out more about this?
Yeah, so we'll be sending out an email in the morning. Essentially, that would give us an overview. And thank you, Tim, for the note. So we'll be sending out an email in the morning indicating how you can follow up with Church Desk and find out more about what we do. But just feel free to take a look at us online, churchdesk.com. There's various resources that you can download there. So yeah, churchdesk.com.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Luke. We'll hear from you one more time at the end of the call. But for now, I'd like to introduce Peter, who heads up the resources team at Urban Saints. Hi, Matt. Hi, Pete. So listen, I know obviously a major part of Urban Saints resources is the Energize website. And so for those who've not come across Energize before, can you just give us a brief overview of what this web thing is?
Sure, of course I can. Energize is an online platform which aims to provide anyone working with children or young people in a Christian environment with resources, inspiration, practical advice for effectively discipling children and young people. It comes from Urban Saints, and Urban Saints' mission is basically about making disciples for Jesus. We believe an important part of that is helping groups and churches journey with young people from childhood to adulthood. I think you said something like 94% of children in the UK have little or no knowledge of the Christian faith, and Energize is part of resourcing the church in and trying to reach out to those young people.
And so Energize provides opportunities for building relationships with young people. How about the 5 E's? Like, how does Energize support that?
Well, the last count, there were, well, not counted recently, but over 4,000 games on Energize. The majority are just for fun activities. Not all of them are messy, although some are, but all of them are designed to help young people enjoy meeting together. That was the first D, in case you missed it. These games are not the only thing on Energize, but they're the springboard towards part of being 1,700 biblically based meeting plans on the site, which in a variety of creative ways seek to educate young people about the Christian faith. All the plans conclude with an opportunity for young people to respond to what they've learned, often in a contemplative way, which is very much about encountering God for themselves. But Energize just isn't about plans. There's a whole host of discipleship resources on the site, including a number of courses that seek to empower young people, develop their leadership skills, and put what they've learnt and believe into practice. On top of that, Energize provides resources that help leaders develop their own skills, so they're better placed to be effective disciplers and examples to the young people they're working with.
Now, one of the things about Energize is obviously it is a web platform. And I was actually involved 15 or so years ago when we started to develop this. And there were big questions at the time about should resources be provided that way rather than books. People were still producing lots of kind of hard copy stuff. Why an online resource? Why did Urban Saints feel that an online resource like Energize would help and serve in a more effective way?
Okay, well, we've always been keen to leverage as many benefits as we can from new and emerging technologies. We believe that's important. You know, we need to be at the head of the curve. Although you're not quite as old as me, not quite, you did refer back to—
You're very kind.
Thank you. The days when the majority of resources for a church or a Sunday school were print-based. And maybe that wasn't the most cost-effective or efficient ways of accessing or sharing resources. but it was what was available at the time. I can still remember one of the Sunday school teams I was on, we had one resource book that we shared between us, and if you forgot to hand it on after that you'd been teaching on Sunday, it meant you had to drive across town late at night and stuff it through someone's letterbox who was teaching next week because you'd forgot to pass it on. So moving online at the time was a no-brainer, and I think it's even more relevant now. An NGI subscription allows an unlimited number of users within a church or group to access and share resources at any time. So that includes midweek groups and clubs, plus activities, and it covers a wide age range. We start at the age of 3, we go to 15 and beyond. And being online allows us, creators of the site, to provide a regular feed of new material and regular updates to existing material and be responsive to our users' needs, one of which, as you touched on in your session, is helping leaders, whatever their age or background, understand and engage with the world of young people.
Wow, well, I love it. We use it in our church for all the stuff that we're doing. How do people find out more and give it a go?
They can visit us at urbansaints.org/energize. That's urbansaints.org/energize. And they can sign up. We've got a 30-day free trial at the moment. They can get on that, have a complete explore of the resources, look at some of the functionality, see how it would work for them and their team, and come back to us and ask any questions that they may have.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Pete. And I really would encourage you folks to do that. I think when I was starting out in youth ministry 30 years ago, I had this whole thing about I had to organize myself and had to put systems in place all myself, and I had to come up with all my own materials and my own rotas and all that kind of stuff. And what I realized is if I took what other people were doing, and maybe sometimes I've adapted it or used different kind of systems and things that were available to me, I could be more efficient in my planning and preparation, and then I would have more time for relationship. And so I hope that you will take the opportunity that's afforded off the back of this webinar to find out about how both Church Desk and Energize from Urban Saints can support you. Now we're coming into land, and I want to give you the results of the little survey that we did around when we talked earlier about the 2 areas of the 5 E's that you all felt you needed to focus on the most. And I wonder what you think the answers will be. I guess when I look at this, I guess I'm encouraged and not surprised that actually the top 2 are, with 59% encounter and 55% empower. And so it seems that nearly 2/3 of us were saying that we need to create more opportunities for young people, both to say yes to Jesus and also to create environments when they can be still and know that He is God. And I hope that has positively encouraged you and provoked you to do that, and be aware of the resources available to do that as well. And more than half of us, 55%, saying the challenge of empowering young people and helping them set up. No great surprise that educate was only 17%. The majority of us were saying, we're probably doing that okay, and enjoy was 28%. Those were the kind of bottom 2 things. Example and relationship were at 31%. And so, and I think I probably would reflect that. I think in a lot of youth groups, and sometimes even our own, kind of the enjoy, the educate, and the relationship stuff we can do well more often than not. But really pushing into encounter and empower does demand even more intentionality. And so I hope this stuff is just helpful. Remember, in all of these things, these are not things to beat us over the head with. Whatever size of your youth group is. I mentioned earlier, when we did this contemplative exercise, we did have a youth group at the time of about 60 young people. Well, last Friday we had 11, and at the moment we have around 11 or so young people who come out on a Friday night. And so I know we always kind of get into this youth group envy, really, or comparison, and I want to encourage you to be free from that. Sometimes we can be so worried about who's not in the room that we forget who is in the room. And so whoever God has got for you to invest your life in, whether it's 5 young people, 10 or 100, then what I hope this little framework has given you is a way of thinking about the stuff that you do. And I hope you found it helpful, and that you'll be able to engage with some of these resources. So thank you from me for listening to this. I'm going to hand back to Luke to round us off.
Matt, thank you for your time today, and above all, thank you to all those who were able to make it. This is now the end of the webinar. This webinar has been recorded and will be available shortly online if there are others in your church with whom you'd like to share it. Please complete the feedback form in the panel to help us improve the quality of future webinars. Are there any further questions from the floor? No? Okay, excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining again, and look forward to having you on the line again another time. All the best.